I've been told that this is the time that was noticed and posted for our work session. It's Tuesday, November the 29th, 2022, 1:30 p.m. We're in the Board of Supervisors Executive Conference Room in Lobby Lane, Bisbee. And any item on this agenda is open for discussion. We begin with the roll call. District 1.
Crosby is here.
District 2, Supervisor English is present. District 3. If you'll let us know if she comes on later, Tim.
Will do.
Okay. Members of the public may also attend this meeting by Microsoft Teams computer or mobile app, or by phone by calling 602-609-7513 or 888-680-6714, conference ID 627-173-159#. If you have trouble accessing this meeting remotely, call 520-432-9200 for direction. Work sessions are a time for county staff to inform and discuss agenda items with the Board of Supervisors. Public comments will not be taken. Introductory work sessions are when you begin to speak. If you would give your name and your title for our purpose, would be appreciated, so that later we can identify who was speaking. Joe, I'm sure you set this up, and we expect you to follow through with what we need to do on broadband, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So Joe Casey, CIO for Cochise County. So we've had a lot of reports in the past years, that there's issues with broadband throughout Cochise County, and there's a lot of federal funds out there right now for broadband help throughout the communities. And so in order to get the details that we needed in order to move forward, we requested a feasibility study. We went out with an RFP, received I believe it was 8 different people responded back. Finley ended up winning the bid, and they completed the study. And so I'll hand it over to Finley and crew to provide the results of the study. So this is Mr. Tim Arbiter, or still got it wrong.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. I'm actually one of 2 firms that come together in a partnership on the feasibility study. But if you would beg my pardon just for 30 seconds, I'd like to do a technology check with Mr. Doug Dawson, CEO of CCG Consulting, who joins us from North Carolina. He's our partner on the feasibility study. So, Doug, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Very good. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Yep.
Very good.
Madam Chair, if I can note it, Supervisor Judd looks like is on the line now.
Okay, thank you. Put that on the record, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So Doug and I will be tag teaming this presentation because we do different aspects of the overall feasibility study. But the feasibility study takes a comprehensive look at everything that's going on in Cochise County as it relates to broadband development. We take a very direct approach through multiple avenues of market research, to which Doug will kick us off in just a few minutes through the slides. But Finley Engineering, we took a look at the technical side of things, where we engage your provider community through interviews, and we take the whole technology and the funding sources of currently what's going on in the county, and we bring it all together into a 200-plus page report of what's going on with broadband in Cochise County. So with that, we're going to go with our first slide here. And with that, actually, let me do, I forget to introduce myself. I'm usually not one to be in the limelight, but here we go. And then I'll hand it over to Doug Dawson, who will introduce himself and then start us into the slides, which you have a hard copy of the slide deck in front of you, and you see it on the screen on the Teams meeting. But my name is Tim Arbiter. I'm actually Director of Broadband Consulting for Finley Engineering. I will celebrate 1 year with the company this coming January, and you're like, you got a new guy. Well, before that, I was actually the State Broadband Director for the state of Missouri. So I was in charge of Governor Parsons' policy initiative on broadband expansion, helping to probably book about just shy of $500 million in broadband money requests of the governor's team of the federal funding that has come down in the past few years. So I did that just shy of 4 years. And when you work for the state, it felt like 10. The private sector lured me away. Finley approached me about, hey, what about doing this for clients and customers nationwide? So that's what I had chosen to do. Prior to that, I was in the Chamber of Commerce business and economic development for local communities in the state of Missouri for 15 years prior to joining the state of Missouri. So I've been in the trenches of trying to figure out local economic development, redevelopment, workforce development, fill in the blank. I probably faced it in my respective communities that I served. So that's a little bit about me. Doug, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and then start us off with the slide deck.
And I assume somebody's running the slides, right, Tim?
Yes, sir. I will be your navigator, sir.
Very good. So I'm Doug Dawson. I'm the president of CCG Consulting. I've been in the industry since the mid-'70s, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am. So it's getting up there. It's getting to be a number on it. So I've been doing telecom and broadband the whole time. My firm, CCG Consulting, this is our 25th year. We've worked with Finley on, I don't know, maybe 60 of these feasibility studies together. So we would think we do a really good job at it. And I think what we have to tell you today is some interesting stuff and also some good news. I think that we can find you a solution here going forward. So if you want to go into the first slide here, Tim. So the project was twofold. One was for this meeting today. It's to inform you guys about it. It's also to give it, there's a very big report that comes with this for anyone in the public who wants to learn more about broadband. So it talks about all the stuff we talk about today in really big detail. And I wrote that in plain English. Hopefully the folks can, it doesn't have a lot of jargon in it for non-technical folks. But the real purpose of the study was to give a roadmap for the ISPs to come and build the broadband. So they, we are offering two things here that they really need in order to come and build it for you. We've told them how much it costs, and we've told them how much grant money they need. And now with those two numbers, they can all decide if they're ready to go get a solution for you. And so, that you would think they would all have those numbers, but they would have to do all the same kind of work we did to come up with it. So you've made their life a whole lot easier with this study. And as Tim said, there's a whole lot of money available now. So let's hope that they will take this study and run with it. Next slide. So the study area was everywhere in the county that doesn't have access to at least 120 megabit per second broadband. So that's, for grant purposes, that's been defined as what's acceptable broadband these days. And in the rural areas of your county, for the most part, people do not have those speeds. They, you've heard the complaints, and we talked to a lot of your folks, and we'll talk about the surveys. We accounted as many as 14,700 homes and businesses who do not have that speed. So there's a whole lot of folks who don't have it. And so that, we'll talk about that more, and there's some maps coming up. So, and so that, it's not an easy number to come up with. I mean, we have put a whole lot of work into figuring out what that map really looks like, because the federal government keeps their own version of map, and it's pretty terrible. So we went through and cleaned it up and did a version that we think is actually correct. So next slide. So the existing ISPs, you all know, CenturyLink, Valley Telecom, Midvale Telephone Company, Sparklight, and Cox. Valley Connections has been overbuilding fiber in parts of the county, which is great. There's a number of fixed broadband providers who use wireless technology: Valley Connections, Transworld, SimplyBits, HPZA Net, however the heck you say that, CIS, Bluespan, and Dakota Pro. So there's a whole lot of fixed wireless out in the rural areas. Not the greatest speeds on it, which I'll show you in a minute what the speeds look like. Folks can also use satellite. You actually have quite a few people using satellite in the county, and there's a lot of folks still using cell phone data and using cellular hotspots. So the next slide talks about the biggest issue, which I have a map coming up here for, but the FCC had an award program 2 years ago, December actually, so 2 years ago this upcoming month, where they made an award for about 5,000 homes to get subsidies to build broadband, and most of it went to a company called Resound Networks. And even though it's been 2 years later, the FCC has not given them the money yet. So right now, those areas are in limbo. Those areas right now are tentatively assigned to Resound, who doesn't have the funding, and because of that, right now, other people can't ask for funding there. So we have 5,000 folks in the county who hopefully the FCC makes up their minds soon, because until they do, we don't really know what's happening to these folks. One of the reasons, that's another issue, and I think the reason that they haven't given the money yet, is Resound is proposing to do wireless technology. In our opinion, after looking at all the, the hills and the valleys and the everything and the trees and everything there, we don't think wireless is the greatest solution for a lot of these areas. And so that's probably why the FCC has not given them the award yet. Hopefully before these big grants come out next year, the FCC gets off the off their butt here and does that for us. There's a tiny little area called Connect Everybody. That award got canceled. You can't even see it on the map. It's really tiny. So that area is available for somebody else to get the funding for. So that map there in the pink area is all the places that area covers. All those places do not have good broadband today, and all of those places are tentatively assigned to get money from Resound Networks, and in there is about 5,000 homes and businesses. So that's a really big issue. If that doesn't get resolved, we don't really know what the heck that means, but it's not good. So, and you're not the only county. This is happening all over the country. There's several other large wireless guys who the FCC has not yet made their mind up on. They have canceled a few of them, so they may turn around and just get rid of them. And if they do, this would be available to your local ISPs to build fiber in. So, and that's what we're kind of all hoping happens, but we just don't know. So next slide. So this is the map. The blue areas are the parts that absolutely don't have broadband, and the blue ones are the parts that are unserved, and they're also the areas not covered by the pink. So the two areas that don't have broadband today that add up to 14,700 homes are these blue areas plus the pink stuff from the map above. So that's quite a bit of the county has really bad broadband, and I think you know that, and I think that's why you hired us. So go on to the next slide here. So we did a lot of market outreach. So we did surveys, we did speed tests, and we actually interviewed a lot of folks in your county, and so to talk about broadband. So we learned an awful lot about you. And so let's jump next slide, and we'll talk about the survey. Survey told us that 7% of homes can't get any broadband. 2% are still using their cell phones for broadband, so that's about 9%. 46% of folks are unhappy with the value they're getting. They're just, they're paying for broadband. They're not happy with what they're getting for the money they pay. 37% are unhappy with reliability. Lots of folks don't like customer service and download speeds. The average price being paid for broadband in the county is $80. That's one of the highest numbers we've ever seen. So not only is it not the greatest broadband people don't like, but it's expensive. I mean, that's largely driven by Cox, but it's also driven in the rural areas. Some of the hotspots and all are very expensive, and satellite broadband is very expensive. So the prices are just a lot higher than what we normally see. And so that's one reason your folks are unhappy. And if someone builds fiber, they'll likely get way better broadband for a cheaper price. So 66% of the respondents to the survey said they support the idea of somebody bringing better broadband to the county. Another 33% said they might support it, but they needed to know more information. Only 1% of the folks said they didn't think that was a good idea. So pretty much everybody's either behind it, or most of the folks who said they need more information would probably be behind it. So that's pretty overwhelming response that people would want better broadband here. Next slide. We got access to a whole lot of speed tests. And so this chart here tells you about the speeds today by the various technologies. First line shows you DSL, that's CenturyLink. It's only 16 megabit on average download and 3 megabit upload. That explains why people with DSL are having trouble calling in here to this session today. I mean, it's very hard on that to do anything online, especially in the upload direction. It's way below the FCC, these grants that want 100 megabits download is the minimum these days. There is 1,000 folks that are on fiber who took this thing, and they have great speeds. So they're getting 243 megabits on average. That's going to go by what they subscribe to. Lots of those folks are buying gigabit plans, and that's 1,000 megabits per second download. So the cable companies are pretty good, 174 megabits down. Their weakness is the 12 megabits up. It's way better than DSL, but it's still nowhere near the 20 megabits that the FCC thinks it should be. And the issue with 12 megabits is it probably works really good for one person. But if you had somebody working at home and a student tried to do their homework, that's where you start getting into trouble. It's not the greatest speed for multiple people using it at the same time. The fixed wireless is pretty slow. It averages 26 and 8. Now, those readings are all over the board. There's some people getting 50 megabits, and there's some people who are getting 2. Again, that's a lot to do with the terrain there. Some places it just doesn't work very good. The low orbit satellites, that's Starlink. So there's there's a whole lot of folks using Starlink right now. That's a lot of readings on it, or that's people taking readings over and over and over again. We're not quite sure, but that's about 95 megabits down and 11 up. It doesn't qualify for those grants, but it's not bad broadband. The only problem there is it's expensive. It's $110 a month, which is pretty pricey. So, but if you only have a cellular phone for your broadband, people are pretty happy with it. And then there's the old high orbit satellites, which are Viasat, and it's not very good speeds either. And then there's cellular. In this case, is cellular hotspots. You have a whole lot of folks on cellular hotspots. It averages 82 down and 15 up. The problem with that isn't the speeds. The problem there is they don't let you use very much every month. You use it a little bit and then they cut you off, and so, or else they charge you a fortune to use more. So it's no one's really happy with that technology because of price mostly. So next slide. So this is handing it back to Tim to talk about the technical stuff here.
So I do the technical slides. So we look at a number of different factors regarding the largest amount of investment, the longest estimated life. It's a look forward, not of what the current situation is, but what kind of infrastructure can be put in place as we look to the future. Very similar to your conversation about roads, water towers, any type of infrastructure, you're looking forward multiple decades. And so you want to look at that with broadband. And so trying to change that dynamic of absolutely, it's a critical need now, but what will you need 30 years from now when you look at the infrastructure investment that you'll be putting into place? The uses, as we know, post-pandemic, work from home is a new opportunity, but it is not an opportunity for those family members who are in a home with little or no internet at all. They must physically go to work or not take advantage of the gig economy at all. So that is something that is of a new use. In addition to the uses of multiple devices in a home, I think I can count at least 12 devices in my home running around, but I have capable and high quality internet. Homes in this county that have no internet probably have a very limited amount of devices, or they have them, they just can't connect, or you overload the hotspot itself. The definition of broadband, this is influx, and it's actually a good influx. The Federal Communications Commission is using their current definition on broadband, but federal funding guidelines that have come out really recently have increased the bar. I think Congress, when they enacted the legislation, said we are probably a little tired of hop skipping over definitions. We want to get to high quality broadband that's going to service citizens of this country extremely well. So they really upped their definition, and everything in this study is based on those new federal funding guidelines. This is what the intent of this document was, to help future funding requests of your ISP, of the county, of the state, of the federal government. So that's kind of what we look at when we look at the overall design features. So this particular slide talks about the RFP itself. You wanted us to look at multiple solutions, but during our research and study, as we found out, via a number of existing providers expanding their footprint and doing so as we speak, we looked at the wireless solution, but depending on the low density as well as the topography challenges make one fixed wireless solution for the whole county difficult to overcome. It doesn't mean that fixed wireless is not a solution as part of an overall package. As you look at fringe opportunities or boundaries to expand a project area when it's a fiber driven and put fixed wireless on the edge just to get the signal out a little bit farther. We're not saying that. We're just saying for your purposes for this study, as you look at the long game, looking at a fiber design is probably one of the best investments you can make at this point in time. Using the latest technology, which allows for 10 gigabit service when you look at the infrastructure. A lot of the speeds that we talk about when you're talking about the data center or the operation center, a lot of that has to deal with the equipment. Once the fiber is in, the fiber itself doesn't change. It's actually the equipment that's in the offices that get changed out to allow for an expansion of speeds down the road. So we were able to see 1 gigabit to go to 5 gigabit, 5 gigabit go 10 gigabit. Now we're seeing 10 going up to 100 in some places, but the fiber's already there. It's really the equipment on the backside. So what we did for the required fiber is about 1,127 miles of fiber in the non-RDOF areas. That's that pink map. those areas that are ineligible for grant funding, if you take that out, that's 617 miles of fiber will be needed as we look at the study. So this is just a graphic of what we look at for the network design. Again, this is, a little bit of a pictorial of how a fiber that goes to a cabinet and how the fiber, each individual fibers go into neighborhoods and access points, and then how it also needs to double back to a data center to making sure we take all the data that's coming over the network, goes out to the World Wide Web as fast and as efficiently as possible. So we look at that when we do the overall design. So what does that mean? We really take a number of different key considerations in the mix versus aerial versus buried. I will say Joe was a stalwart in this, helping us bridge the relationship with the electric co-op and understanding their infrastructure. So many, many things with Joe. It's one of the challenges that we face in the country. Trying to understand local electric infrastructure is actually a very good thing when we're talking about broadband. So again, thank you to Joe for that. There's a number of
different... How far are these two Cochise County Republicans to go on the board there?
Okay, so Jen also mentioned the race, the very, very, very historically close race for Attorney General here between Abe Hemida and Chris.
Thank you, Tim. So I mentioned the one data point about the 10 gigabit, the one data center, and then again, whenever you're doing fiber installations, a lot of ISPs today are putting in the extra fiber for the future growth of the county when you look at growth patterns throughout the county as well. So here's the network design map. If you would take the previous eligible areas of your county, this is kind of what a network design looks like from a county perspective. But let's just take this one layer a little bit deeper. This is the community of Tombstone. So we looked at all of the address points and we roughed out a high-level network design, which is the previous slide. But you would see this kind of level of detail for each of the areas and pockets that we did for the county. So this is Tombstone if you were to do a fiber to the home design for the community of Tombstone, whether that be an ISP, another provider that would come in, but this is kind of what a design would look like. So this is where we build the overall budget and the numbers that feed into the overall cost for the network design. And so with that, Doug, I'm going to hand it over back to you and kind of have you run through these particular numbers and take us forward on some of the other financial slides.
You bet. So the purpose of quantifying all these numbers again, these are really done for the ISPs. And so we end up with two numbers. The first number is the whole 14,700 people. It's $92.5 million to build out to all of them. If the FCC does award those pink areas, that reduces to almost 62 million, both very big numbers. But what really matters is that very last line is the cost per passing, because that's actually not too expensive, which I'll show you in a minute. For grant purposes, that's actually a pretty comfortable number. What you can see in the other costs, the network is mostly fiber. I mean, that's the fiber that goes up and down all the roads and up and down the streets around houses. The drops are the fiber that goes from the street into each house or business. And then electronics are what lights the whole network. There's some electronics in that data center Tim talked about. There's electronics at each person's house or at each business. There's a whole bunch of huts because this is a big county. And to get to all those various neighborhoods, there's huts in various neighborhoods where we distribute the fiber out to people. And then the operational assets are a few other things like vehicles and stuff for the ISP that they would want to buy if they were going to go do this. And so, again, 92 million if it's everything, 61 and almost 62 million if it's just everything except those pink areas. Hopefully the FCC helps us figure out which of these two it is here pretty soon. So the next slide. What we did here, and this looks at the whole county area, we said, look, how much grant do you need to make this work? And so what you can see there is we need about anywhere, it goes by the penetration rates. The more customers you get, the less grants you get. And the amount of grants needed go from 23 up to 40% to break even. That's really a great number because it's way below the threshold. BEAD is the name of the giant $42.5 billion grant program that's going to be coming out in about a year. And that's where the funding is going to come to build these areas. it will not be at all a problem for ISPs to get the amount of grants they need out of that, because the amount they need is way less than, those grants will go up to 75%. This is going to make the ISPs pretty comfortable. The reason these percentages are low is even though everybody doesn't have good broadband, they're not all rural. When places like Tombstone are in here, they're not rural. They're pretty, the houses are pretty close together. That really pulled the average price down here a lot per household. And so that made this affordable. If those towns all had fiber, you know, the numbers would look very different. It would be very expensive just to get to the most rural places. But the, you know, the network turns out to be very affordable. They're big numbers. It's still $90 million. But the fact is, the FCC or the Congress, when they pass the law, says the intentions of that grant are to get broadband to every corner of the United States that doesn't have it. So the intentions are for that money to solve this problem here. So, you know, that doesn't mean it's going to be automatic, and we'll talk about that next. We have to get somebody lined up to do it, but the money's there to get it done, as this slide shows. So next slide. Again, the financial performance, we did some business plans for the ISPs, and they're more than welcome to them when they want to look. All sorts of things change those numbers slightly. The interest rates right now are up higher. That adds to the cost of borrowing money to build the networks. You know, borrowing the money over 20 years versus 30 years makes a difference. Broadband prices make a difference. We've assumed pretty conservative prices, where your average cost in the county today is $80. Our models started with $65, a much more affordable price. And on top of that, there's federal programs that low-income houses can get $30 off of that, so they would be able to get it for around $35. And the cost of the network applies, but I know, having worked with Finley, that number is conservative and achievable. So we think that $90 million number is pretty darn solid. Next slide. So again, the grant funding at $42.5 billion, that money's actually going to come to the state. So the good news is the ISPs don't have to go to the federal government for it. They're going to go to the state broadband office for it. And their goal is going to be to get it out here. The state's share is going to be at least $600 million. We think it's probably going to be higher. It's probably going to be 700 or 800 million, even 900 million. It's going to, you know, we don't know that yet. That's one of the things that they're still working on, is how much money goes to each state. But it's going to be a lot of money, and so the money's going to be there. The state broadband office will be the one actually deciding who gets it, and their goal, their marching orders are to get it to everybody. So that's, you know, that's what's going to try to happen here. If you have any ARPA money left, you could use some of that as matching funds. The state of Arizona also still has a little bit of funding going on that's separate from the $42 billion. So there's some other grants that are being awarded, and some of that could come to the county. There's also a whole nother set of grants available for $3.5 billion that could do things like get computers into homes, teach people how to use computers. It could be used for workforce development, you know, to get people trained to do jobs. And so that money is available if somebody in the county wants to go after it. So next slide. So, you know, the big question is, what the heck do we do about the RDOF areas? If they don't decide soon, the ISPs in the county are going to just be in a real crunch. They're not going to know if, at this point, they couldn't apply for those areas. And so, you know, at this point, it might make sense. You have one of the biggest RDOF areas of anyone we've looked at, and it might even make sense for someone to write the letter to the FCC and go, could you please resolve this for our county? You're killing us here. So, you know, you need to decide if you're willing to throw any money into it of your ARPA money, and then, you know, really what's your best role? And I, you know, the role that we're going to suggest here to you is, you know, you need to turn around and go out and meet these ISPs and make sure that somebody is planning to do each part of the county. So what you want to do is put a map together and make sure that somebody's going to ask for the money everywhere. You know, what we don't want to do is have all this grant money come in and folks only try to fund half of it. So we really, the goal is to get these ISPs to come and ask for this federal money so that they can go out and get this done. So I think that your best role is to work with them to make sure somebody's doing it, and then support their grant applications. I mean, that's really the best role the county can have here. And then, you know, really also decide, if you want to do find somebody in the county, it could be a nonprofit, it could be, a whole lot of different folks who might want to go after that digital equity money for folks and get more computers and things. And so that, again, we just need to figure out who that might be so that we can start, again, supporting their grant applications, basically. So next slide. So the next step is really to reach out to the ISPs. You can do that informally. There's not a whole lot of ISPs in the area. We listed them for you. You can bring them in one by one and just ask them what their intentions are, show them the maps, make sure they understand what's available. We've talked to all of them during this process, so they know all about the study. I think we've probably already, I don't know if you've sent it yet, but certainly we want to give them a copy of this study. You could also do that more formally with an RFI or RFP or informally, but we really want to make sure somebody's going to serve every inch of the county. That's really what most matters here. So you might want to do some more community outreach. We had a whole lot of folks who had a whole lot of questions about broadband. Make sure that you publish this report. Just make sure that, that you let folks know what's going on, because they're just dying to get a broadband solution of it. I can't tell you how many folks are going like, can you do it now? We want it this month. So, so I think they just would love to know what's going on. You also want to have somebody review the fiber policies to make sure you don't have any rules in place that make it hard to build fiber. So that's a fairly easy thing to look at. But the county could have some rules that need to be eased up to make it easier to get this done. And then finally, the FCC maps are really terrible. There's going to be several opportunities to come in and try to get those fixed. The easiest way to get those challenged would be if the state's going to do it. You might want to reach out to the state to see if they have plans to challenge those maps. If those maps are better, then the state probably gets more money. So it's everyone's benefit to get the maps done right. There will also be later challenges next year. And so that's something that, maybe Joe or someone can look into to just seeing what the heck's going on with those challenges. So that's really, next slide is who we are, I think. Yep.
Yes, it is.
Certainly feel free to reach out to us with questions. Today here, we're ready to open up and have you ask us any questions you want to ask us. And the bottom line, I think, from the whole thing is it's a lot of money, but it looks very favorable for grant purposes. And I just wish that I could snap my fingers and fix the stupid RDOF problem so that we actually could go straight to figuring out the final solution and not have to worry about what the FCC is going to do with that stuff. So, but other than that, it looks very positive to get this done. So.
And Doug, I actually can add on to that in our last conversation with Joe, that is something at the county that I did on a regular basis as a state director when there was a conundrum with the funding programs. I used the weight of the state and the weight of the county to say, hey, Federal Communications Commission, we're making a formal request. We're making a formal request to decide, because one, Resound needs to know the answer. Two, if it's yes, okay, what are the next steps forward? If it's no, you need to open up that area and promote those areas for other providers that may be wanting to expand in that area. The other thing is to outreach to other federal elected officials, to let them know you're going to be making the outreach to the FCC. They like to know that. They want to advocate on your behalf, to know if they have a copy of CC of that letter or that communication to the FCC. That is probably the biggest key recommendation. I would say next step, let's get that in motion so the FCC gets a little bit of a push. Whether they take it seriously or not, it does behoove the county to make that impression to say, you got to decide. Please tell us one way or the other, because the funding is, there's been multiple rounds, Doug. What we used to say, at least almost a half a dozen rounds since the time that the FCC announced RDOF.
Yeah,
So,
and we've missed all those opportunities in the county.
Missed all those opportunities.
Yep.
So, because you do have providers in your county that are regular applicants to USDA funding programs, but because of an RDOF award, USDA won't look at it. I will tell you there are some states in the union that are considering RDOF areas, and if the FCC has not made a determination by the time of the state grant award, some states have actually awarded some grants. That puts it into some gray area for the FCC, but it is something that we're seeing more and more from other states, is that they are getting aggressive with RDOF areas because of the lack of response from the FCC. The second thing is reaching out to ISPs. You know, Doug and I, we've led multiple kind of conversations from very informal to formal in reaching out to the provider community. You do have providers expanding in your county. You do have providers who are being awarded funds to expand in your county. The other thing you should know too, in several conversations I had with ISPs, very complimentary of the county, very complimentary. All of them said no issue, no barriers. If anything, if they could help us with state and federal barriers, that would be phenomenal. So I would say that would be a next thing is if there are any known barriers, and we will find that out, you know, in the next outreach for state or feds, we can use the weight of the county to help the state or federal agencies to get off the dime to make a decision. Because sometimes with permitting processes, this new federal funding will have all of the layers of permitting in place that are required. So it's gonna be on behoove both the state and the federal government to be as quick and efficient as they possibly can. And those two words are not necessarily in the vernacular of Arizona and the federal government, but we can certainly help unjam some things. And then finally, the funding that will come down to the states through the BEAD funding will have to have the framework that the federal government has given it through the U.S. Department of Commerce to operate on. But the states are really going to be the drivers, but they have to go with the funding to the extreme unserved first, then the underserved. That's going to be a layer of complexity. This helps take that complexity for the providers to a level that they can understand of where to go first. And then I would reiterate Doug's recommendation for your larger population centers. The digital equity and the training and the advocacy and the devices are just as important because it's not just to have access. You want your citizens to be able to actually get on and understand how to access the internet, and some may not have the ability to afford a device. These programs will allow for that to happen, utilizing maybe a nonprofit or a county entity, but those are TBD. That will also run through the state. Thank heavens. That'll run through the state, but then the federal government has said and Congress has said you must rely on counties, city leaders, and regional leaders to communicate the needs of what's needed from your respective county. And now you can answer that when the state comes asking. So with that, Doug and I, that's our Dog and Pony Show. Now time for questions.
Could you reiterate for me one more time about how these areas are
that is the
established?
Okay, so
Who put them in place?
Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, they have
Just design them on the map, or for what reason? I never heard of them before.
Well, the FCC regulates the telecommunications industry and the communication network. One of the things and programs that they fund through a subsidy is to deploy high-speed internet. And so when the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, that was about a $20 billion fund that was put out to auction for providers from all over the country to bid on areas of high cost. And so those areas were pinpointed on a map, so that the pink area, those areas were on the national map when RDOF launched. And providers from all over the nation bid on those areas. And it's what's called a reverse auction. So providers were able to bid often and regularly, and some bid the prices down so low that they actually secured them. And this particular provider got it at a level where they could provide gigabit service with wireless technology. So the Federal Communications Commission announced that auction just a hair over 2 years ago, the results of that auction. That was the winner. And so states and other federal agencies have to look at that area as an awarded, quote unquote, awarded area.
Who was it awarded to?
Resound Networks.
Resound,
yes.
And they're a company out of Texas. So
this particular company, although awarded, this is how the Federal Communications Commission hasn't been funded, because they have to go through their due diligence. The FCC looks at all of their technological solutions, their financing, They have to have a letter of credit in place. There are some final things that Resound has to do in order to reach the level of authorized, which means you get your money.
And they're not making any progress.
Well, they're not going to start construction until they get their money. So this is the crux.
I mean, not making any progress in doing the preliminaries.
Well, they submitted all their information. Now the FCC has not made it. Go ahead, Doug.
We think it might be because of the technology. We think the FCC might say we don't think that's going to work here, but we don't know because they won't tell us. But that's our guess. But we don't know for sure. So
we had a similar situation in Missouri, and it's only because there was a frustration as a state director. Same thing, RDOF. The provider was actually deemed not financially eligible to take the award. They took so much area in the country that the Federal Communications Commission said, whoa, you guys, you just started business 7 years ago. How can you take $1 billion in subsidies from the federal government? And so they threw them out of the mix. So that happened to us in Missouri, which allowed those areas to open up for the state grant. So this is the frustration point.
Well, the maps have been a problem for years and years and years because they're self-reported.
Correct.
It's kind of like we have a problem in some of the big industries here. They self-report what they think the value of their property is. We don't get to value it for them.
Yep.
So
we in this particular map here, this is Finley and CCG's assessment, taking all of the funding areas that are going on in the county for your providers, understanding also the providers that are expanding in their area, and we know because they've shared some information with us. So in the orange area, that is our best determination between our two companies that this is truly what's served because of that information and data and intelligence that we were able to receive. So Doug?
Now let me put a footnote there because some of those orange areas aren't served yet, but they've gotten the money and they're going to be serving in the next year or two. So some of those are not finished construction yet, but we know that it's coming. So yeah.
So we wanted to save the county the headache from if we denoted that as today as eligible, but they've already received funding, so we just kind of set that to the side. Unless they default in any way, shape, or fashion, this is the ever-evolving of broadband. It is much, a private industry now has an infusion of public support, and so it's trying to find that right balance between that right amount of incentive to produce the result that you need. And so we just wanted to be cognizant of the existing providers and what they're doing and what they've been awarded in your county, that they will make good on. So,
Ms. Judd, you're on the line. Did you have any questions? Your area probably has more fiber optic than anyone.
I just unmuted. So what you're saying is the private companies already have gotten some of this funding, and that's what's reflected in the orange most likely.
yes.
And then the one that we saw on the slide, Resound, is that who it was? Yeah. Are they going to duplicate areas? Are they going to be like, if they did get awarded, is there a chance for Valley Telecom, let's say in my area, for them to say, wait, we already have that covered? What happens with that?
Typically, what will happen? Go ahead, Doug.
Valley is allowed to go anytime out of their own money and build any of these areas. So that what they can't both get federal funding for it, but Valley could go and build it. In which case, what I think would happen is Resound just wouldn't bother with that area if it was already covered. They would still pocket the money. They would still pocket the money, I bet.
That doesn't sound good, though.
No, that doesn't sound good. But now the orange map again, that includes these pink areas shown as orange. So, right. the blue are the places that absolutely nobody has claimed yet.
Yeah.
So.
I haven't been able to put them both together, but when you said that,
now
we
have a map that does that. We have another map where you can see that would be shown as blue also. We have all sorts of versions of the map.
And a lot of these blue areas are uninhabitable, like the dry lake.
Yes.
So, I feel funny about people getting money to put broadband where that's totally uninhabitable.
Well,
and they won't. Made like that?
They won't build.
They won't.
Yeah, they won't
Okay.
they won't build where there's not roads and stuff. No.
Yeah,
no.
but they shouldn't be able to
So-
get money for that either. There should be some sort of a
And-
way to
and
say
they
that.
won't. And as you can see,
Okay.
you can see some of those areas where there's no roads in there. There's no money for those areas. No.
Okay.
So.
Well, I really appreciate what you did. I wasn't trying to throw a wrinkle in it. It's just that I was we have sought funding before, and
I think we lost
we
you.
got kind of shot down there at the last minute. It was a real great experience. I just wanted you to know that I'm really sensitive for my, and I know there's other companies too, but Valley Telecom, I'm sensitive in their behalf. So thank you.
Okay. Tom?
I have no comments. Thank you. My questions were answered about the RDOF.
It's a national conundrum. And what's interesting about RDOF is there'll be a future round of RDOF. And so there's essentially screams and cries from the provider community, now the public community, hey, FCC, you got to continue to evolve this program to make it work for us, because right now it's not working for us. From state leaders to county leaders, everybody is just frustrated. And so that is probably one of the key things that can be done immediately after acceptance of the report, and those things that, and Joe and I have talked about this, is until they get off the dime, you have massive amounts of your county that's not being paid attention to. Even though Valley Telecom could go where it wants to go, it just can't do it without public subsidy or public grant assistance. So,
But this is a really good launching pad, and I think that's what I was looking for. I think that's what Joe was looking for, because a lot of the cities and organizations want to do something with this, but they need some leadership, and I think that's where Joe is going to be the most active, is trying to fit the puzzle pieces together so that we get the complete picture of the county, because it's not good for us to cherry pick. As county leaders, we need to make sure that everyone's getting service. It doesn't always happen, but that should be our goal.
Yeah.
Is to make sure that whatever we're doing is something that's going to serve the majority of our population. And so, like I say, great first step. And so we'll look to you, Joe, to tell us what the next step is, because I know Seago's been looking at this. Everybody's been looking at this, but there needs to be a cohesive, so we don't, in this case, I don't think we need to have redundant studies. We may need to have redundant fiber, but we don't need to have redundant studies.
Yeah. So this gives us the shapes of the puzzle pieces now.
Right.
And now we start putting those all together.
Right.
So if you would like, I could start to draft a letter for the RDOF to send up there to try to get something moving up there.
Seems like a good first step.
Okay. And then we'll also look at those areas that are blue there and start to dive down and see if we need to divvy out different sections and say, okay, this is an area that we want to go after funding first, and start to prioritize those now that we have the maps.
Because with the help of the gentleman right over here, he's got all that information of poverty, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you look at one of those, he'll tell you exactly, is this the poorest place we need to start? And that's where the federal funds are going to be the most active.
So they've
That's
already
why in
put
the
together.
past, I think the Indian reservation has gotten the lion's share of the money in Arizona, because they can always show how poor they are.
and if I may, if you would permit me, one of the suggestions I would make to you, Joe, is that once the draft letter is, complete and everybody's comfortable, I would send it to the government affairs person who has broadband in their portfolio in your U.S. Senator's office. They will know who exactly that they'll take a pass at that draft letter and maybe improve it a little bit more. But once they have their ability to, because they know how the FCC ticks and what will resonate with the FCC. So by then taking a pass at that draft letter, it'll make it stronger. And then once it's sent and they have a final copy of it, then they themselves can make a call to the FCC Government Affairs Office too. So.
And have we already reached out to the internet service providers here locally?
We've been in contact with them prior to the study or during the study, but we have not given them the actual study yet.
Okay.
And that would be also part of the next step is continuing communication with them to see are there areas that they are already going after or want to expand into?
We can set up meetings with each of those.
When you're doing that, are you going to be taking in information? I know they sometimes say that this is proprietary information. Can you just say to them, if you want to work with us, it's no longer proprietary? Yeah, you have to tell us where you are, or we're
I
not.
don't think it's going to be that easy.
Well, in the report, there's some summary conversations and interviews with each of the providers. So we boiled down of what they were able to
The
share.
cops used to be terrible about that. They had all kinds of things that they said they were doing, and we're sitting here going, huh? It's not here.
Well, actually, the Cox interview, I had booked, I think it was like a 30 or 45 interview, and those actually ended up being about an hour and 15.
Really?
It was a very good conversation.
Well, they're getting a lot of money from the state now, so
Yes.
they're feeling better about it.
Well, part of that was describing what they were wanting to do, but at least it was a chance to converse with them. But going forward, yes, Joe's right. It may not be as easy as there'll be some indications that they can provide. But if they're going for a future state grant or a future federal program, they will need to disclose something to give overall information to both of you in order if a letter of support is provided or if funding is available in the future, because you need to have that because the state's going to have it and review it and assess it. So, yeah.
So Terry and Michael, GIS team back here, they have already built maps based off of the data sets here, based off of poverty,
That's
map
what
and everything else. They've already got all those lined out. And
Gary can do anything like that. Just turn him loose.
That's true. It's true, Larry.
Yeah, it's true. I wouldn't say it if it worked. Okay, next steps then, it looks like we're going to try and figure out the problem with the FCC, send the letter, start making contacts with the providers that are available now, see what their plans are, distribute are you going to give them the 200 pages or just this one?
we'll post the 200 pages out on the website. So we'll have a broadband page specifically for that, which we'll put the PowerPoint and any other relevant information that's meant for the public out there.
Right. Okay.
We do have, back to what you're saying about we do have non-disclosure agreements with a lot of the providers where they'll share their information, but we can't give that information publicly out to people.
Right.
But they have been fairly open throughout this process.
Well, when you're building the house, you need to have the contractor information,
Mhm.
Yeah.
And essentially, we're building a Cochise County broadband house. We need to know what the elements are, and it's just that simple.
Yeah, we took our county through a formal process to help with some funding that they wanted to allocate to the provider community to go for a state grant in the spring. And the county actually narrowed down to 2 providers they wanted to support to split the money. And so essentially the conversation with them is, okay, between you 2 providers and the county manager, you can figure out a clean project area that will be, fundable by the state without any hiccups. Oh, and it needs to be 2 areas that are not overlapping because we're not supporting an overlapping areas and doesn't conflict with any other funding programs. So it was a very interesting process and one that the provider community actually welcomed. One of the things that I learned routinely from being a state director is the provider community just wants an opportunity to present itself. If it chooses not to, then it chooses not to. But for the most part, in a collective way, if the provider community responds with an area, they tend to stay along, and it does strengthen the state application when you do have county support, and they know that. So
I think one thing that occurred to me when we're looking at the extra things that we might qualify for, the digital, our library district.
yes,
Because we're talking about, the rural areas not being served, and so we've made an effort to try and, it isn't a one-stop, but at least, to try to provide some services there. And what a great place for them to check out these devices that we could have, and what a great place to train people how to use them. And so that's another way that we could think about working on this in the future.
Taking notes.
Yeah. Okay, well, is there anything else? Any comments? You said no. Peggy had hers.
No, just got, thank you.
Hello,
Yes,
can
go
everybody
ahead.
hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, this is Stephen over at Seago. I know we mentioned some, state representatives. I had a Zachary Carey out of Congressman Grijalva's office call me maybe a few weeks ago asking about related broadband projects in our region. And I couldn't tell if it was based on a complaint, people complaining whether or not they were going to receive broadband. But anyway, if it's at all helpful, I have this gentleman's phone number and email if that seemed like it would be a good contribution as far as moving things up the chain.
Yes, Stephen, please forward that to me. Thank you.
You got it.
And we have worked with Seago and Stephen a lot throughout this process. They helped us get a lot of this, the Ookla data, which is a point at all the speed tests. And so we've got a lot of that through Seago and through their team there.
Well, I knew that there was cooperation going on. Yeah. Anything else? If not, then we have another meeting in 4 minutes. Okay. How fast can you leave? We have another meeting in 4 minutes.
Well, we appreciate your time today, so, yep.
Thank you for being available to us. Next meeting at 2:30 in the Board of Supervisors Executive Conference Room for an emergency Board of Supervisors meetings. And with that said, this work session is adjourned, you guys.